Long Voyage Back, 1983, by Reinhardt. Page 30. He moored her at the end of the gas dock, which was closed for the night, with her 3 white hulls gleaming under the glow of the dock lights. The 50-foot trimaran lay among the old fishing boats and conventional stink pots, like a futuristic fighter plane among World War II relics. But towing her in was a joke, like pulling a space satellite with a tricycle. While he had Jim secure and adjust the spring lines and fenders, he went into his cabin to change for going ashore. He was tired now, the dull fatigue of trying for 6 hours to nurse a sailing vessel towards her goal, with winds that wouldn't ruffle a feather on a flea. He poured himself a shot of brandy and switched on the shortwave radio. After he pulled off his blue jean cut-offs, he stood naked for a moment trying to tune into the BBC frequency. He finally located it and, after pulling on a pair of pants, sat back on his bunk with the brandy and listened. The cultured English announcer reported with the usual stylised indifference that a flotilla of 30 private boats had left England for Ireland or the Azores, that international flights out of the country were booked solid, with near hysteria reigning at Heathrow. The exodus was stirring up a national outcry, and one MP categorised the fugitives as no better than rats deserting a sinking ship. An analogy that made Neil smile sardonically. Sinking ship was a devastatingly apt metaphor for Great Britain on the eve of possible nuclear war. When the BBC announcer began to discuss more parochial events, Neil turned the set off. He was tired and depressed, a combination he knew from experience often went together. He felt a restless need for a woman, a feeling he knew was often associated with low-level anxiety. It was the Middle East crisis, of course, but also the fact that in a few hours Frank would be joining them and Neil would lose his freedom. He always resented it when an owner first rejoined a boat he had been living aboard as a captain and king. The owner inevitably liked to run things differently, and he hated to relinquish the control that was his when he was sailing with just a crew. Frank was about the only owner he'd ever sailed with who consistently shared Neil's exhilaration at the gruelling joys of an ocean passage. Frank genuinely loved sailing, loved being out on the water, and wasn't aboard simply to impress clients or make a few women. But Neil was still a little depressed at the prospect of his return. Jim interrupted his gloom by shouting down the hatchway that he was going to change and spruce up. Neil stood up and searched for a clean sports shirt. Jim might be a sailor like his father, but this trip north had been too easy a passage to be a true test. In the last 4 hours of their crawling with the tide, Jim had given up on sailing and spent his time with his guitar and cassette player. Well, that was cool. He himself had read half a novel. Glancing at his watch, he saw that it was 9:10. He quickly switched on the shortwave radio and tried tuning it to a ham radio operator he discovered on the trip north, who broadcasted sometimes at 9. After the news from the BBC, listening to a farmer from East Tennessee might be a welcome relief. Soon he'd located the farmer's gruff voice, speaking as usual in a casual folksy monologue, as if he was chatting with neighbours around a hot wood stove in the middle of winter. Not everyone's so happy. Mel Hutchins says the rain we got last night was too much for his spring rye and not enough for his tomatoes. Of course Mel wouldn't be satisfied unless God rearranged the whole upper atmosphere every day to reroute the right weather patterns over one of Mel's 70 acres. Last time I know Mel to praise the weather was when the remains of a hurricane struck here one October after he'd harvested everything, but Jack Pilson had half his crops still in the ground. Mel and Jack don't get on along too well, and Mel said the hurricane showed good timing. It's getting towards sign-off time. I sure hope the Russians stop their messing around over there in Arabia. Izzy Klein says people thinking there may be a war cleaned out half of his A&P this morning, and that was before he opened. Just joking, folks. He did say it appeared that everyone in town seemed to be expecting guests this weekend and had to stock up 3 times the normal amount of food. Well, as for me, if I thought there was going to be a war, you wouldn't catch me buying canned baked beans. You wouldn't catch me sitting in a fallout shelter next to anyone who had. That's sure enough not the way I want to go, but I don't expect to die for a while yet, so I'll be talking to you again on Sunday. This is Charlie Whitler signing off. When Whitler's voice died away, Neil smiled and stood up. At least there was one man who was showing no panic. Up on the deck, under the star-studded sky, Jim was waiting for him, dressed like Neil in jeans, sports shirt and deck shoes. Jim hadn't shaved since he'd left Fort Lauderdale, and his slight beard, longish hair, salt and sun-streaked and bronze skin tone gave him precisely the salty air he probably was trying to achieve. He looked as pleasantly excited as he had when they'd entered the Cheapsake 16 hours earlier. The only bar in Tangier was a fisherman's hangout, rather than a tourist trap, so there were no fishing nets on the walls or stuffed fish, but instead dartboards, video games, pool tables and a television set. There were half a dozen men sitting at the bar and 2 old men playing chess at a table. Neil led Jim to a booth next to the bar. Through the window they could see Vagabond's mast and cabin top above the docks and the pilings. "Where you fellas been from?" a large bearded man with a pot belly asked them from his seat at the bar. "Fort Lauderdale, Florida," Jim answered proudly. "We made it in 5.5 days." "That's pretty good," the bearded man replied promptly. "That must be one hell of a powerful dinghy engine." While Jim looked startled and uncertain, Neil and the men along the bar all burst out laughing. Jim, realising they had seen Vagabond's entrance, soon joined them. "Once or twice we cheated and used the sails," Neil said, and remembered he had to phone to get a message to Frank. "Don't blame you," said the man. Neil stood up, went to the bar to order 2 beers, and then went over to the payphone. The wife of the marina owner answered, and Neil explained the situation to her and asked her to tell Frank to take the ferry to Tangier. When he returned to his table, he was glad the television set wasn't on to remind Jim of the outside world. "Well, mate," he said to Jim after he'd taken a long swallow of beer, "I'd say we made a damn good passage, even if we did fall a little short." "Vagabond's a great boat, isn't she?" Jim said. "She even tows well," Neil replied with a smile. "I like crewing for you," Jim went on. "It's a lot better when there are only 2 of us. With Dad and his friends I feel like a passenger. I never get to do anything. But being alone at the helm, especially at night, or when she's surfing down a big swell..." He stopped, smiling, flushed with the pleasure of the memory. "Anyway, I really enjoyed you putting me to work." "I wish all my crew would say that," Neil commented, smiling. "Blast 'em, I say. Hit 'em first," came a voice from the bar. "You tell 'em, Charlie," the voice cowered, "and don't forget to duck." "Hey, my friend," Neil said to the large man at the end of the bar, hoping to change the subject. "Are there any women on this island?" "Oh yeah, there's women all right." "You keep 'em locked up?" "Don't have to," the bearded man replied. "We keep 'em so tired from screwing they ain't got no energy to go out." Laughter tumbled along the length of the bar. "Must be all the oysters you fellas eat," Neil suggested. "Eat oysters?" the bearded man exclaimed, grinning. "Shit, us baymen can't afford to eat oysters. Too expensive." A few men laughed. "Still," said Neil, "it's too bad you don't have a few women in especially good shape to greet tired sailors returning to land after a long stint at sea." "Well, we got 2 or 3 ladies like that," a little man next to the bearded man said. "But they always get themselves laid by tourists and speedboats from the eastern shore. Men who tell 'em they're all pooped from motoring across the bay." The quick burst of laughter at this remark made Neil think it was an allusion to some actual women they all knew. He finished his beer and went to the bar to order 2 more. As he was standing there, a pudgy woman came in and complained to the bartender. "The TV don't work. Could he fix it?" After handing Neil 2 bottles of beer and making change, he followed her through the doorway into what were probably living quarters. "See what we mean?" the little man at the bar said, turning to grin at Neil. "Old Jake's going back there now to give her a quick one. That TV business is all a front." But Jake returned almost immediately with a frown on his face. He went up to the television set above the bar and turned it on. Neil and the others were all watching him. The screen remained dark for a few seconds, but the voice of the talking head that appeared on the screen immediately began in a tense, hurried voice. "I repeat, this is not a test. This is not a test. The emergency broadcasting system announces a national war alert. All precautionary measures should be taken immediately to prepare for possibility of an enemy attack. This is not a test. Civil defense workers are to report immediately to their assigned posts. Police, fire and emergency medical personnel on standby for national war alert should also report to their assigned posts. I repeat, this is not a test. This is not a test. The emergency broadcasting system is announcing a national war alert. All precaution..." It was only when he realized the announcer was not going to say anything else that Neil became aware of himself standing next to his table, still holding his beer bottle, his mouth opened in stunned bewilderment. As the bartender lowered the volume and began switching channels, and Neil could see the same announcer flash by on all the operating channels, he also became aware of the total silence in the room. Finally, Someone at the bar spoke. "Oh, good Jesus," a tired voice said. "Now what the fuck are the silly bastards trying to prove?" Then the television picture disappeared, the lights in the bar went out, and the whole room was in total darkness.